Buddy, hello Gravitrons. I'm more gravity. Let's play chess. Here we have the end of one of yesterday's games. Just play through it really quick. It's a version of the Petrov defense, and one key move here I'll look at is here with black to move d5 is very strong, and sort of trading pieces for a while. Black gets in this bishop takes g2, trades the knight for his bishop, and gets that bishop out of there. Some trades of pieces, and with these opposite colored bishop endgames, we often see one side or both create a barricade. This game didn't do that. The position actually didn't really call for it, so I was able to get an advantageous position where my opponent's bishop was in front of his line of pawns, and then go in here with king to h2. White's options start to dwindle, and here white leaves the f4 pawn unprotected. Black can start to make attempts at promotion, promotes, and then mates. It's a fun game. It's nuanced at the end. I'm really glad I played that game of chess. So, with that in mind, let's play a new one. Alpin Sicilian. Go for the central pawn duel. Here's your bow. Okay, mostly a clean game. I had one major goof. It isn't listed as a blunder, but I'm sure it's one of the misses. That's around here. Rook takes c3. Rook takes c3. Rook at 2 takes c3. No, this wasn't where it was. Aha. Yes. Rook takes c3 here is not a good move. So that allows the fork and white loses a rook. But fortunately I have so many extra pawns that I have a majority on the king side and a lone pass pawn on the queen side that I was able to win anyway. Let's go through and sort of examine the game if I made the correct move here. These last few moments of the game would be a little bit more clear, I think. I'm probably saying this move might be pawn to f4, kick the king around a bit. Now, rook takes c3, and if d4, trying for the fork, then the king is free enough to capture the pawn on d4. So a little bit more here. In a regular tournament game, I would probably play rook to c5, and more or less maybe my opponent will try king to e6. It's looking not so great because it isn't so great for black. It's looking not so great for black because it isn't so great for black. Rook to c5, king to e6. That would be one way for white to go. Another way, in time trouble, we might just start rushing this pawn all the way up. My opponent can't break my chain of pre-moves aside for maybe pawn from d5 to d4 check. And that's actually good because it highlights the fact that the king needs to capture at that moment. So, you could try to break the pre-moves, but then I've got board even better. Alright, so where we have white to move, and we're up like a lot. So, which am I going to go with? I could go with... I think I'll go with the pawn, racing the pawn up. We're going to just trade this pawn, makes the situation on the king side even more clear. See, now that the fork is more likely again. So I'm going to take myself out of that fork and just run along here on the A file. This seems natural. Okay. Might go through the game in its entirety. It depends on a little bit on how accurate the game is viewed. Here with the version where I've fixed that boo-boo of a fork on d4 forking c3 and I think e3, somewhere around there. So in and around that neighborhood. There's these other misses, like here, pawn to f5. Looks like white has an opportunity to play knight c3, torch 4 likes, or a3, torch 4 likes. Pawn takes f6. There's a retort. Knight takes f6. Okay, so here I agree with the computer with torch a bit. Knight takes f6 here. We'll let the computer play it. Knight takes f6, and black's pieces are actually really well placed. We say that there's this hole on f7, but white can't exploit that hole very well. We'd have to play bishop to e2 first, then put black in check, capture with the knight, followed by queen takes h5 check, and with pawn to g6, the queen can't rely on this usual tactic on e4 because, first of all, the square is covered by black's c6 knight. So, yeah, black's actually doing really well in this position. This early in the game to have achieved better than equality, I think, is pretty good. So I'll note that for my future games. That's not what we saw in the game itself. Instead, knight takes f6, and I'm making this battery between d1 and e2 so that I may play checks in certain lines in the future. The option is at least there, has to be calculated by black. It's a type of attacking move that's easy to calculate as an attacker and not so easy to calculate as a defender. Maybe. I don't know if I buy that. But knight to c3, and then my opponent starts piling up on this short diagonal between e1 and a5. The position's approximately equal. I like that my opponent is feisty and playing attacking chess, and with great moves like knight to e4, continuing to pile on the pinned piece. White does not want to have to play bishop to d2, right? And then knight takes d2, king takes d2, and the knight has captured the bishop on d2, forcing white to capture off of his starting square with his king, and thereby preventing any possibility to castle castle king side or queen side. What am I doing here? Look at this. King cannot castle now. Alright. Rook to c1 is the sensible move to defend against this attack while maintaining material equality and not moving my king off of his starting square. Castle's king side is good. It's the best move. I push f3. Yeah, like this move to f3 will help block in my own bishop, so that's the downside. But I thought it best to make this kick permanent. I could try with the bishop, and then maybe there's a rook sacrifice for the exchange on f3, and where's white going from there, that kind of thing. But no, after f3 it's more clear. The knight will move. Knight moves, capturing on c3, recaptures, and my opponent continues to play aggressive style chess. Even if it's not an attack or a threat that's for sure, like my opponent plays bishop to a3, we're not sure that this is going to work out well for black, but it keeps me having to respond, so I have to respond. And look, as per sort of the game plan of aggressive chess, I made a mistake. Rook to c2. computer wants rook to d1. Well, I'm still in this after image of when all these pieces were bearing down on c3. So, sometimes we have a little bit of an inertia with our thoughts. We play rook to c2 to keep this very well defended, but the attack just isn't there anymore, so I didn't have to. Better moves were available by moving the rook. I think the b1 actually makes the most sense. d1's not bad either. d1 or b1. Somehow with rook to b1, Torch 4 has worked a way for this to be a one-pawn loss for white. Somehow rook to b1 and black will win a pawn. Maybe something to do with the pawn on c3 being pinned to white's king, and that leaves the pawn on d4 more vulnerable than otherwise. Anyway, I played rook to c2. Maybe some inaccurate moves. I'm glad to have the queen trade, though. I had a pawn, I get a queen trade. I agree with Torch 4 that white is ahead by less than its material lead, which means that black has, I don't know, just see this as being more coordinated. Look at for instance, this knight that black has now in e7. He's got great many squares for which or to which he can go or romp or find or whatever. And the bishop is looking a little bit less great. Moving to b7 kind of hits into his own pawn chain, but perhaps black can play a5 and then play bishop to a6, contesting my veteran bishop, my developed bishop more directly, and rook takes a6 or something after a trade there. So that's looking okay. The bishop on b3 is in this crazy spot here where he can't really be attacked without having some sort of counterattack. So you think maybe white plays his dark squared bishop to c1, and then there's a trade on c1. But short of that, he's kind of handcuffing the rook on c2. That rook will not move to b2 and lose itself to that bishop, and that rook will not move to c1 and lose itself to that bishop. So he's in kind of this advanced position where he's nonetheless really dynamically affecting white's thoughts and plans. So not only that, black has castled. All right, this diagonal that would be otherwise used to attack black's king, no, way too clogged. The castled rook enjoys a semi-open file. So all these things, you take all these things into account, and it means that white is, instead of being a pawn ahead with an even position and having a pawn over here on the progress bar, white is instead 7/10 of a pawn. The material is still very strong and driving the evaluation as well it should, but the 3/10 of a pawn go against white to some extent for having no equivalent to the a3 bishop, for having no knight that's so freewheeling as the one on e7, for having not castled yet, for white having not castled yet. All right, all those factors together, third of a pawn, 3/10 of a pawn. All right, so now we have this move a6, maybe a little bit slow, but it could help this bishop in some way after pushing this bishop back. I would really, honestly, my move here for black, pawn to a5, and then contest white's bishop. This bishop for white on b5 is like his most powerful piece. This bishop for black on c8 hasn't moved off the starting square and has obstacles ahead of it. You want to trade this bishop get your rook in a different square, an active square for sure, all the while, maybe even double on the A file as a result. You want to trade this bishop as black here. A6 kind of punts my bishop back to some kind of inferior square, but is it really all that inferior to move to d3 and be spying pawns on the king's side? I'm not sure. Where did I choose? Okay, yeah, I chose that square, and I'm thinking black has missed somewhat of an opportunity here to play pawn to a5. Neither king is under attack. They're both quite safe. I'm going to castle here, both to prevent potential future attacks or distant future attacks along the B file, but also to get some better coordination and better placement of my rooks, especially the rook that was on H1 that's now on F1. He's just better positioned to help fight for the B file. So I thought this was an opportunity for white. Torch 4 likes rook to b1 best, making an issue for black out of the b5 pawn. Advances will end poorly for black. But I took the opportunity to play bishop to g5, attacking the higher value piece and forcing black mostly to play rook to f7. Any other move by the rook and the knight. Okay, I thought the knight would hang, but it looks like my opponent and I missed. Bishop takes e7, perhaps. Did we miss that? What? Anyway, the rook needs to reposition himself, and f7's the way to go for that. But I then pursue the rook, and the tactics are still there, even with the bishop covering e7. And white is now ahead by about a full piece. Some tricky maneuvers through here. You play a move like pawn to b4, and you want to capture with your pawn, but then you're going to lose a rook on c2. So I didn't fall for any of that, and made the best out of position. Yeah, so here this was almost horrible. I really could have shot myself in the foot here, but this is a horrible move. Rook takes c3. Rook takes c3 gives up too much, as I've shown. But it is what I played, so we'll kind of live with that for now. And I took a moment to say, okay, Jord, you lost your rook for no good reason, but 30 seconds on your clock. You've got just about the best decoy possible, and a majority on the king's side. So I thought, let's let that decoy work its magic, and my king, and just leave it right there. The king still has to go way out of its way to catch that pawn. Meanwhile, my king will have made headway on the king's side, and we could try to create a passed pawn all the while. You know, we'll respond to certain things, but this is my decoy, and we're going to use him as such. Alright, so my opponent resigned here. Then the threat of promoting on a8 and gathering a pawn on h7 is too much, even under my time constraints, because my opponent's no way going to be able to block certainly a promotion, and I think mostly white's going to have two promotions, which means he can form this tandem with the two queens that just moves across the board and checkmates. So let's take a look at that just to be clear on that. All right. All right. All right, that's all for today, folks. Happy Friday. Uh, thank you for watching. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Gravitrons. I'm More Gravity. Have a great night.